Hello everyone, Yvonne Heath here with another episode of Love Your Life to Death, conversations about living well, grieving well, and dying well. I'm so happy today that Sarah Maguire is joining me. Thank you so much, Sarah. I know you have a very busy life. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, so Sarah is the ALS Regional Manager for York Simcoe, and I'm going to ask Sarah to tell us what ALS is and whatever information that we should hear. So take it away.
Well, ALS stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and it is a fatal neuromuscular disease that causes progressive paralysis. Essentially what this means is ALS patients will lose the ability to walk, talk, eat and breathe without assistance. Most lose their lives between 2 and 5 years from diagnosis, although I have seen people lose their lives a lot quicker than that in only a matter of weeks. And then we do have 10% of patients that live beyond 10 years.
Wow, beyond 10 years.
Yeah.
So having that diagnosis and living for 10 years, that would be a difficult journey to navigate.
Yes, very much so. And at first, because it's usually such a shock, a number of my clients were very, very active in their life before ALS. In fact, I have some professional athletes who were diagnosed with this. So they're not expecting that diagnosis. So when they're told, if they're told that it's a slow progression, usually they're very relieved by that. But then what happens is later on you realize that they have long enough to experience the full range of symptoms and disability. So it is in itself a very difficult journey, both whether it's quick, whether it takes longer, it's tough.
For the person with the diagnosis and the family around and the community that loves them, it's a whole, wow, a very difficult journey. And so how long have you been in this position?
Coming on 6 years now.
Incredible. I mean, you're just this young, cute lady. Why? So what would fuel this desire to be, helping people knowing that they are facing inevitable end of life and demise, and what brought you to this?
Well, when I was first researching different organizations, I came across ALS, and I was working in health charities anyway, and I had not heard of ALS, and that bothered me, first of all, that it was flying under the radar, that someone in that field had not heard of it. And then when I read up on it a little bit more, I realized that a large number of the symptoms associated with the disease were actually symptoms that I'd lived with at home as a young child, because my brother had cerebral palsy, and it was a very severe case of cerebral palsy, and there was a crossover in the symptoms. So he couldn't walk, he couldn't swallow properly, he couldn't speak, he couldn't control his movement. There was severe cognitive impairment too, which is not typical of ALS.
Right.
But I recognized the difficulty that these families and the patients would experience living with severe disability at home, and my heart just immediately connected with it.
Right. And so your brother, I understand that he died when he was very young?
That's right. And so he was 7 and I was 9, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have any sort of private caregiving at home. So we were all part of the team, even though me and my sister were quite young.
Wow.
We were all part of what it was to be a caregiving team. And so I had experience of living with disability. I had experience of what it was like to have a significant death, and also what it was like to be, in some small way, a caregiver.
I mean, that's amazing at such a young age to learn those big lessons in life. And I love that you've taken that experience that obviously, I know at a time when there probably wasn't support about children talking about grief and death and dying, but you've taken that difficult experience and turned it into something good, because I know you are a very caring person, and I know that because I actually asked somebody who you've spoken to. I love doing this. So Suzanne, whose husband Harry had ALS and died a few months ago, and Suzanne said that she found you to be warm and very helpful, always quick to answer questions and concerns, made sure our needs were attended to in a timely fashion. And isn't it so nice to hear that?
It is really lovely. And that's, I mean, I get told all the time, boy, that's a tough job that you do. But for me, I feel very lucky, because I get very good feedback, because I'm coming in at a point of crisis. And when families are at a point of crisis, being told you're not alone
No.
makes such a difference. So I feel very fortunate that I'm lucky enough that I get some feedback like that, and that's wonderful that Suzanne said that.
Yes, Suzanne was so gracious to share some of her journey, because of course, as with anyone, it was a very devastating thing to hear that her husband, who she said that they thought they invented love. They were, that couple that everybody envies. They were just that couple, but they embraced this journey. They grieved. They allowed each other to grieve. They opened communication, and I asked her what the most important things were, and it was open communication and changing priorities and patience.
Yes.
And you learn, you learn all of that stuff in a very hard way.
Yeah.
And we talked about, first of all, you have to bring laughter into it. You might as well, because it's already serious enough. And one of the big things that we, when people think, we're a society that we're so private, and we're so, we want, when we talk about dying with dignity or having a disease and dignity, people always think, if I'm incontinent, meaning, you can't, your bowel movements, or you have to pee, and it depends, and that means that's not dignity. And, I just say to people, that's just your body. That is just your body, darn thing, failing on you. That has nothing to do with dignity. And we have to get past that. And of course, in diseases like ALS, you need to get past that.
I completely agree. It's about how you live. It's not about the dying part. It's important to have those tough conversations as early as possible, when it's not critical right then and there that decisions are made. If you can have those discussions, get all the logistics out of the way, and then get back to the living part and enjoying life. Just because you've been diagnosed with this awful illness, it doesn't mean to say you're not still allowed to enjoy life. And that's the dignity part to me. It's not about the body function.
Absolutely. So yes, just push that aside. And I brought this book, Tuesdays with Morrie, right?
Great
Wasn't
book.
that just the most incredible story? And, you would wish for anyone to, everybody should read this book, Tuesdays with Morrie, where he just embraced the fact that he had ALS, but he also allowed himself to grieve.
Yes.
And I remember every morning he would, yell, scream, cry, and then just get on with his day. And I mean, he was a very intelligent man. And so he shared his wisdom, and his legacy lives on and on and on. This book is all over the world. They made a movie. And, if you can embrace your end of life, and of course, the other big message with that is, if you've had the talk about end of life, but even long before you've had a diagnosis, wouldn't it, because you have just so much time in this critical time. And if we talk about plan and prepare for end of life long before we are facing it, then you can embrace that time in life. And
that's right.
Easier said than done, absolutely. Most of this isn't it?
Absolutely it is. But it all has to start with being able to have the conversations.
Yes.
And this book, for anyone who is struggling with the idea of laying some of that stuff out on the table, Tuesdays with Morrie is a great start. I've had a number of my clients who have read the book and felt more comfortable with the idea of having some of those conversations.
Good. Yes.
I will also be recommending that they read your book as well.
Oh, good.
Because,
well, I'm glad.
Yeah, I think it is absolutely essential that we as a society become more comfortable with those conversations. And that's what I learned as a child, because it was during a time where child's grief was not recognized. There were no supports, there were no programs in place, and being raised in a British stoic family with military ties, it was, stiff upper lip, just push on through. And it was a very isolating grief. And I remember going back to school and feeling kind of radioactive. I would move it into one area, everybody would flee because they didn't want to talk to me, because children hadn't been taught how to have those conversations.
And but it's interesting, because a lot of those children grew up to be death-phobic adults, and they still don't know how to have those conversations.
Exactly.
And when I do a presentation and I share my message with people, I say, if you don't remember anything else, 3 words: just show up.
Yes.
Show up, show up for people. I know, if someone has a diagnosis of ALS and you're worried, I get it. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Show up anyways. You can't fix it. People say, well, what if I cry? Well, get yourself Kleenex.
Exactly. People are so worried about
human.
saying and doing the wrong thing.
Just show up.
Exactly, because if you don't, you can guarantee you're doing the wrong thing.
Absolutely.
Show up and take a chance. Maybe it'll be a good thing.
And when people say, oh, I don't know if I should call.
call
Call.
and see
Just
what happens.
call. If they don't want to talk to you,
Yep.
they probably won't pick up the phone. Just show up. I've had
Yes.
people say that, you know, you sent me that text and that meant the world. I mean, you know, my goodness, that was 2 seconds. But back to children with Suzanne and Harry and their son Jeremy's, his granddaughter Isabella was a part of the end of life journey, and she shared moments with her grandpa, and she was able to, at the funeral, you know, they released balloons for him. I know, don't make me cry when I'm almost done.
Yeah.
But also, and you know, she was able to express herself and run around, and then she said to everybody, I love my grandpa. He had love for everyone. He had a smile for everyone. And you just watched everybody melt. But how important, what a change, what a difference from what you experienced, right?
Yes,
And
it would have been a huge difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm so grateful that you did take your experience and you're taking that love and that experience and you're helping so many people, because it isn't an easy journey at all.
No, it's not. And what I learned was how important it is to have the conversation, because I saw the flip side of that when you don't.
That's right.
And so I became that person who's really comfortable talking about the uncomfortable things.
That's right.
And so when I have those conversations with my client, I'm not injecting my own fear of the conversation in it, so it's immediately lighter.
Yes.
And it's surprising how much humor you can inject into these conversations.
It's already serious enough.
Exactly.
Let's have some laughs.
Absolutely.
I mean, it can't get much more serious. And
Yeah.
and you know, I think that with many healthcare professionals, and that's a whole other topic, but they are not comfortable with grief, death, and dying. We are not well prepared personally for grief, death, and dying. We don't talk about that in school.
Nope.
And you know what? It's our responsibility, I would say, because community is looking to us for guidance. We need to show up for ourselves. We need to talk about, plan, and prepare for life, end of life, all of it, and we will be better able to show up for people.
Agreed.
Yes. We are almost out of time. We need we should have like a whole, I know.
A whole
we could
series
talk,
to
we
ourselves.
should have a series, yes. But thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate you bringing awareness to ALS and telling communities to show up for people in, you know, with illness, and being able to be there, and allowing children to be part of the process, and knowing that grief is going to be a part of it, and other grief will also show up. So let's be there as community. Just show up. Doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
You can't fix it.
Nope, that's so true.
And it's okay to be messy.
Yes,
Yep,
absolutely.
We're all messy.
Yep.
We're only human.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Oops. After the break, we will be joined by Dr. Matthew Follwell, and we will be talking about MAID, and he can explain what that is. Back in a few minutes. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And I am so happy that Dr. Matt Follwell is joining me for the second half of this episode. And Matt, thank you so much. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
And yes, I know you have a busy schedule because I'm now reading everything you do. Staff radiation oncologist, chief of oncology, Simcoe Muskoka Regional Cancer Program at RVH in Barrrie, and an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. Matt, do you sleep or do you, because you also have your partner Carol Ann, a son Austin who's 5 and Madeline 3. Seriously, no one can do all of this.
It's a good balance.
It really is it a balance?
It is.
How did I trick you into being here? That's so wonderful.
Good cause.
Yes, well, it is. And of course, as I said, we're going to talk about MAID, which is the acronym for Medical Assistance in Dying, which is now legalized in Canada as of June 2016.
Correct.
And I certainly know there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of misinformation, and I mean, it's brand new. And of course, I wrote my book, Love Your Life to Death, because we are a death-phobic society, and we don't like to talk about this. So this is really driving people out of their comfort zone, and I understand. But I feel very important for us to become educated, because it's here. And so I'd love you to share, because you are also co-chair not only of End-of-Life Palliative Care Committee and also Medical Assistance in Dying. So welcome, and I'd love you to share your most important message about MAID.
Great, thanks Yvonne. I think most importantly when it comes down to choices in your health is that it is a choice for people. From my side, I want to make sure that everyone has the right information to make those decisions. As an oncologist, we're faced with life and death and not so life and death choices, and like you said in your last segment, it's really important to have those advanced care planning discussions as soon as possible between ourselves, for example, before you're not capable of making those decisions. And it's not about necessarily making choices, making sure people know what your choices are when you can't make them.
Palliative care is something that I think that this is also bringing light to the fact that wonderful palliative care is a very important part of our culture, and needs to, not all people have access to palliative care, but that is something that, because MAID is now here, people are starting to realize and recognize, okay, we need to get better at end of life, and palliative care is one decision or one option for people to get enhance their quality of life. But MAID is still a decision that some people will opt for, and they need to have that information. It's not one or the other, though, is it?
I see it generally as a spectrum of care, and for everybody that choice will be different, as we've said. I think one of the best parts of this whole discussion that's come out over the last several years is that palliative care has been put into the forefront, and it's actually put into legislation, and part of our practice at RVH is to make sure everyone has good access to palliative care. And that it's not just when you're at the hospital, it's when you're in your community, and making sure that it's not just because you go to the hospital you can get palliative care. It can be delivered in your home for you. And
that is so important. And the other thing about palliative care and the fact, again, MAID has made these conversations come to the forefront, because the other important part with palliative care and people at end of life or in a dying process or a disease process, like we were talking with Sarah about ALS, is that it takes a village to show up for people, and we need our family, our friends, and everyone to be able to be a part of this journey with us, and medical care and palliative care and hospice care to be a part of it. But we don't need that 24 hours a day. We need the people we love to be empowered and a part of this journey. And also, whatever choice we make needs to be honored. And so when people hear, I've had people say, of course, there's the religious aspect of people. They said, medical assistance in dying is murder, plain and simple. And when you hear that, what would you respond to that?
Well, I'd say first is probably an education opportunity. I respect people's views, theological views and choices, and it is a choice in their view. And it's about respecting other people's choices too. Theologically, it may be considered murder by the facts, and by legal opinion, it is not, and that's what the legislation put forward by the government in June spelled out.
Yep. The other thing is, and it's funny because I just spoke with a lady, and she's like, well, people are going to force grandma who has money, and they're going to force her into this. And again, I feel like that's the education piece that needs to be in there, because you can't just force grandma to go get medical
Not
assistance
at
and dying.
all. There's very strict regulations on who would be able to qualify, obviously, which does also highlight some of the gaps in the legislation currently, which they will be looking at, or at least promise to look at going forward. You have to be 18. You have to have ability to have health coverage in Canada. You have to be capable to make your own decisions. You have to have a grievous or irremediable disease or
Intolerable
deterioration.
suffering. Yes.
And one of the things that they also added in, which threw a little bit of a wrinkle in it, was that the death had to be foreseeable. So one of the issues that I see, at least with access, is getting two people, especially on the medical side, to see what may be foreseeable for someone. You might have varying opinions on that. So that was something that people initially struggle with. When it comes to the facts around individual cases, it's often a lot clearer than that. And there's a lot of consensus, generally speaking, in the cases that we review at RVH.
And I understood, I went to a seminar. You have an assessor who assesses you, I mean, very in depth, just you and this assessor, and then a separate person, and then there's a time of reflection, a pause after to make sure. And I mean, obviously people can change their mind at any time. And I think that also, you know, when people have perhaps a devastating disease and will be facing end of life, I have to think that at times just knowing that's in place, and if they're receiving excellent palliative care, it may not even get to that anyway.
Exactly right.
But just to know that, okay, if my suffering becomes intolerable, then this is an option for me. Do you agree with that?
It is. Some of the aspects of advance directives is difficult to play into that as well, based on what the legislation says. I do think that'll be something that'll be looked at as we go forward, because it is a need and a gap in that legislation for sure. But just knowing that, again, I think it helps access for good palliative care, because palliative care is not simply end of life care, as you've already said. Obviously, it begins different times for different people in different situations, but it needs to be something that people can access and know what that is and get some information about it and provide the right information so they can make the right decisions for themselves.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because I mean, this isn't about what my opinion is or what it isn't. It doesn't matter what my opinion is. It's here. And so I feel that it is everyone's responsibility, you know, if they're going to play in any part, is to educate themselves and, you know, to know that how I feel about it. I just met, as I told you, this wonderful woman, and we had lasagna, and the kids were running around, and she was a delightful woman, and she has been seeking information on MAID for the last 2 years, because she has had MS for 20 years, the last 2 years in bed. And, you know, for me to say, why don't you go out there and just embrace your life, and, you know, you still have your cognitive skills and everything. I don't know what it's like to live in her body for the last 2 years and not be able to do anything. And, you know, and that is what, she is bright, she is seeking this. And so I think that people are going to be going that direction, and I'm glad that it's making people think about values. I think talk about end of life, what your values are, and don't make decisions just based out of fear or on fear. Educate yourself. Educate.
Yeah.
And
it's like a lot of end of life planning. It's something that you don't want to be put in a position where either you can't make your own decisions, or you're in a situation where you don't feel like you're able to make the decision based on the information because of time issues and urgency and things like that. That's not the time to be making these kind of decisions with your family members. It's something where you can, especially when it's something that's potentially that can be planned in terms of the general deterioration of someone. You want to be able to have that good death if possible, right?
And we can create more good deaths in our society. Some, you know, I've had people say, the first chapter of my book is entitled, "It Was a Good Death." And I had some people say, how can you say it was a good death? It was a death. I'm sorry, but we're all going to die. I don't know. That shouldn't be news to people. You know, there is no such thing as an unexpected death. Time of death, how somebody died, yes. And we don't all die of old age. And so we need to talk about, plan and prepare, and the best time is long before we are facing it, and have those conversations with your family. Because I also, with MAID, your family does not necessarily have to be involved in the conversation. And I think that would be very sad if you weren't able to discuss that with your family. and you made that decision on your own, and then they were blindsided.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and as we talked about before, prior to this legislation, people were taking this into their own hands before, without medical assistance and without
Right.
proper supports. And that's one of the things that I think the legislation of it really helped, because it would potentially be a significant harm reduction for people that were being asked by family members to help them through this kind of process and to
yes.
assist in their death, without any help or supervision or support or what happens after the day.
How traumatic that would be for people. And so with the physician, because I have to think this is a big thing, and it's not to be entered into lightly. And for physicians, when they're do no harm is how they feel. How do we get around that with MAID? Because if that's the physician, easy for me, I'm sitting back here, but that physician or nurse practitioner
Sure.
has to be that person. How did you think that there'll be a negative impact, or?
Well, that's a fantastic question. There's obviously in the legislation a role for someone to have a conscientious objection to this. It's a very active participation in this and wanting to be part of this for people. Some of the things that people go through at end of life because of the conversations not happening in terms of resuscitations that may not be in their best interest or even medically indicated, that's doing harm to people sometimes, right? So you have to take every individual as an individual and look at their circumstances. Number one, talk, and number one, listen to them in terms of what their wishes are, so that you can help them give them the information to make the decision that's right for them.
Well, and it is a whole new way of looking at this, but at the end of the day, I feel that excessive suffering is harmful. I've seen in my 30-year nursing career, I've seen a lot of excessive suffering, excessive treatment.
Sure.
Because we didn't want to face end of life, and that's not okay either.
And some of the toughest decisions or discussions, pardon me, are the most important ones to have.
They are the most important ones to have.
And without a doubt, means a lot to your patients.
That's right. So I thank you for this. I know, like you said,
Pleasure.
a lot of people are struggling with this, but it's a matter of education and most importantly, having these conversations long before you're facing it. And so that ties in with my message to plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death, and always bring your own tambourine to the party. Thanks for listening in. I'll see you next time.